Yeah, thanks everyone. Welcome to the Festive Tech Calendar for 2024. One of us made a Christmas effort, even though it was my idea, and I didn't. But if I'm honest, I looked like a complete idiot wearing a Christmas hat of my kids, um, who the eldest told me, I hope you're not going in public with that. So I thought it was best not to. Um, just a quick shout out, first of all, to the organisers who obviously spend a lot of their free time putting this together every year. Everyone else's content this year as well. It's been really, really good so far. And also for the charity that the organisers are raising money for this year, which is the Beatson Cancer Charity. They provide some wellbeing services, group support services, and also importantly bereavement services as well. So you can donate to those guys by going to the website, which is festivetechcalendar.com, and there is a link on there. Okay, so we're going to get cracking, and we're going to do it a little bit different. We've decided not to do super formal presentation style, just because we can, and it's Christmas. So I'm just going to let Julia introduce herself first before we get cracking. But we're going to be talking about Azure API Center and some of the great features in there, what it is, what it can do, and some of the cool integration with VS Code as well.
Awesome, yeah. Hi, Martyn. Hi, everyone. So I'm the one who made an effort with my Christmas sweater here, and I love being here. So thanks, Martyn, for having me here. My name is Julia. I'm a product manager working on an Azure API Center, and I'm super excited to talk today with Martyn about Azure API Center overall. We are a very new Azure service. So at this point, we are really here to promote the Azure service, to show what are some of the capabilities. And because we wanted to make this session a little bit less formal, I'm gonna have a question right at the beginning to Martyn to see if he's done his homework. So whenever you hear Azure API Center, what are some of the things that comes to your mind?
Oh, let me think. Number one has to be governance.
Awesome, love it.
And also, I have so many APIs. How do I keep track of them all?
Perfect, yes.
That would be number two.
Sweet. He's definitely done his homework. So Martyn has talked about a lot of APIs. So if you are an organization that is constantly struggling with having APIs everywhere, we know that APIs are being built and deployed everywhere these days. So we truly are a solution where we are trying to combat API sprawl. So keep in mind, API Center is an API inventory solution. Also, his first shout out was to API governance, which is also very, very important, especially if you think of what are some of the recent security risks that you might have. So having your APIs and really making them very compliant is super, super important. So whenever I joined the product, whenever I heard API governance for the first time, and I'm not sure how Martyn felt the same, especially because he's the developer in this room. Whenever I heard API governance, my first thought was, oh no, API governance, because especially as a developer, it usually means a lot of pain points, right? You usually, okay, I'm building out my web API and then I'm deploying it. And usually at some point, an API admin comes to you and is trying to tell you, oh, by the way, your API isn't compliant. So this is actually what we also want to help with. And that's kind of what we're going to show you in a little bit is how yes, we are an API governance tool, but we actually want to make it more integrated with your developer workflow. So yeah, we have kind of like this demo prepared where me as an API admin, the mean API admin, first of all, I'm going to show you API Center, but then Martyn is going to show you more from a dev perspective to make API governance a little bit more fun. This being said, Martyn, would you agree about the API governance thing? What comes to your mind, especially as a developer when you hear it?
No comment. No. Yeah, I would definitely agree. At the risk of offending other developers as well, but I am one, so we'll possibly get away with it. I think generally speaking, I think it's very different now, but generally speaking, I think developers of, years gone past were probably a bit more hesitant to going through certain processes to ensure that their code was fit for the environment it was going to. And, I think there's plenty in history that gives developers a bad name potentially because of that. Certainly well publicized failures where code has been pushed, straight up into prod. And it's kind of broken everything and all hell's broken loose. So yeah, I do I do agree that first time, I heard it, was like, oh, okay, API governance. But actually, who knew it was an exciting topic and still includes code? So yeah. And another thing I would definitely add as well for people who are kind of new to APIs is, what's all the fuss about APIs? So for me, they're kind of the building blocks of the modern app, especially when we look at containerizing those apps or building microservices that are domain-based APIs, where you have an API that deals with users, you have one that deals with products, one that deals with your car, and one that deals with your payments, etc. The classic kind of scenarios. Those APIs drive those products that are built on top of there, and most modern products have some kind of API layer. Obviously, much bigger platforms have lots of APIs. Think Azure as well as a product has lots of APIs. API Center has an API, which I find kind of comical as a nerd as well. API management has an API for you to interact with it, and everything has an API. And they're becoming more and more integral to an organization. And another angle I personally like to it as well is, if we're a technical team and can control access to our data through APIs, as a tech team, we can focus on doing that, but we can also give our citizen developers through something like Power Platform, for instance, or any other low-code environment, the ability to have controlled access to our corporate data in a way that we deem safe and can rate limit, obviously, and authenticate and authorize against. So it is very important, and APIs are everywhere, and most organizations, if not all organizations, will consume some form of API in one way or another. And you can guarantee pretty much any service you use on the internet will have APIs that power it as well.
Oh, true. Yeah, definitely. Microsoft runs on APIs. Every Azure service, we have exposing APIs, right? So even within Microsoft, we have the same challenge, right? More and more Azure services are being created, or more and more applications, tooling support, features, and all of these need to be supported. And usually how it is supported by APIs as well. So truly, we as an organization, we as Microsoft have the same issues. This being said, let's, I think, just show people what we mean by Azure API Center.
Yeah, let's go.
So let's jump right into the demo. Keep in mind that this is live, so you know how it is with live demos. We might see some, we will see how it works. Also keep in mind, I have the API admin hat on. So the lens you're seeing through my demo is usually what we see API admins or API platform engineering teams look at. So that's why I'm starting in the Azure portal itself. As I mentioned, Azure API Center is an Azure service, and we want to provide this tool, this service to platform organizations or platform engineering teams, how they can better manage their API ecosystem. So bear with me, this is the lens of an API admin. And right in here, I have my API Center up and running. One of the core functionalities is, of course, the APIs tab here. So you can see currently I only have 2 APIs registered. There are a bunch of different ways how you can register these APIs. Of course, via the portal. We do know that automation is the key point. So we want to make sure we want to make it as easy as possible for our developers to bring in these APIs. So of course, we have CLI support, bicep support, and GitHub Action support. So as a developer who's building out these APIs, it's just as easy as possible to bringing these APIs into their API center. As an API platform team, and right at the beginning, whenever I ask Martyn, well, what is one of the things that you think about whenever you hear Azure API Center, is the governance piece, right? So how do we define API governance in Azure API Center? API governance, first of all, it's a big word, and a lot of people think about API governance differently. One piece can already be you need to have this one inventory where you find all of these different APIs. A lot of organizations already look at us and they are like, perfect, I now have transparency. This is what we mean by API governance. In addition to that, and we totally agree, that is one piece of the API governance play, but another angle how you can bring in more API governance is API design time governance. So what is one of the assets while registering your APIs that typically API organizations bring into API centers is API definitions, it's API contracts. These could be REST API, so we are talking about open API specs here. So with API analysis, we are helping organizations to, first of all, define rules, how they would like to see, how they would like to better understand their API governance. And then within the API analysis tab, check all of their APIs that they have in their inventory against these rules and see if they're compliant or if they're are in a good API governance state. So what this looks like is that, first of all, I have rules that I have defined, but now I want to see, are my APIs following these rules or not? So this is where you can see error or warning messages based on these rules that you define. And I'm going to show you in a little bit how you can do this. But first of all, this is the overview, and you will immediately see all of the APIs and all of the error warning messages that might be shown. But you can also check it out in more detail where you go into the detail analysis report, and it shows you, especially as an API platform team, you're not the one developing these APIs. So you want to know more about what is happening and why isn't my API compliant. So you can find detailed information here. It also gives you rendered Open API spec information here, so you can find the inline details, how this is being done and what is happening, and you can switch back and forth to just get more information about this. Okay, so this is how you consume these API governance outcomes. So how do I define these rules? Right from the get-go, whenever you start spinning up your own Azure API Center, it will come with default rules. So if you're just new to API governance overall, you can just leave this enabled. You can just check and see whatever our recommendation is, and you can test it out. If you're a little bit more advanced, you might want to customize these, right? So via the managed rule action here, you can find these rules and you can see I went ahead and I actually changed it. So how do I change or modify these rules? And this is where our VS Code extension comes in. So if I now open Visual Studio Code, I have the Azure API Center extension installed. I can now log into my API Center from within my IDE, and you will find a rule set folder and also rule set YAML file that I currently have in my editor open here. And you can see these are exactly the same rules that I have. And I went ahead and I basically defined 4 different rules, just to give you a little bit of a better understanding what you can do. It's important to know that we are using Spectral as an open source linting engine. So if you already are familiar with Spectral, perfect. You can go ahead. You can just use whatever rules you already have and put them in here, or you can go ahead and define your own rules. I think it's for at least some basic rules, it's very straightforward. You have a description, you have a severity. So this is where the error warning messages comes from. And then you can provide a little bit of what are some of the things that you want to make sure that is happening. For example, I want to make sure I always have an operation ID. And it should also always be in a lower snake case. This being said, so I've defined as an API admin, I've defined my rules, I deployed it to Azure API Center, and I have a way to check my API governance from a more holistic level. So I can see API governance for all of my APIs. But I think that's where now Martyn is coming in is, well, if I'm a developer building out my web API, how can I leverage API Center as early on as possible? So I'm already making sure it is compliant. And yeah, maybe Martyn, that's where you can show what the flow would look like from your perspective.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. So let's share my screen, which would be there. So yeah, so you already saw a tiny bit of the extension that Julia was talking about there, but just to show you that it's the same one, you can obviously see the name there, and we're already expanded out into roles, and you can directly open the rules straight from the pane on the left hand side, and you can see exactly what you saw in the portal. Now, obviously, as a YAML file, there is arguably a small development angle to the rule offering as well. You can edit, add, create. So, for instance, you could copy and paste in and change the field name if you wanted, and so on and so forth. And then when you save that, you have the ability to deploy the roles back up to the API Center instance that we are connected to. Likewise, if there have been any changes made within API Center, you can right-click and sync the latest rules down to the local file. So why this is helpful, I guess, from a developer's perspective. So I'm not going to sit and create another weather forecast API because everyone's probably fed up with those and knows exactly how they work. But for instance, if you have created an API already, let's look at our climate API for argument's sake. And we go down all the way through the versions and definitions, and we look at the open API spec that Julie was talking about. Obviously, we can create these using Swagger and the integration with .NET when you create your APIs, and we can export that specification directly into the interface here. Now, what is really, really good about the integration here is that you can obviously see a bunch of actions, and we've got some huge errors down here, which is great. But let's go back up for a second and look through some of the things that are missing. So you can see here, we are being told that there is a problem with snake case. So the operation ID, if you remember from the rule set, so let's just open the rule set sidebar, and of course it closes it completely. So we need to export that again. Side by side. Obviously, we were looking for the operation ID being present and required. You can see it is, but the one that is missing is the snake case definition is missing. What's really good about this is if this was a complicated fix, you can just ask Copilot to do it for you. So you can just go on to fix, and it will basically say to fix the problem, change the operation ID to low snake case, and you can see that it's put the underscore in, and you could accept that yourself from there. Again, just to highlight further down, you could also use your own hands and keys and typing to do this, and change the text here, which again is fine. Reason I wanted to highlight that is, as with everything with AI, yes, it is stuff that you can generally do yourself. I knew exactly what I was doing there, but my argument generally with, especially GitHub Copilot is, yes, I know what I'm doing as a developer, and yes, I could do it myself, but could I do it as quickly? Even if I do then to make a couple of changes. Obviously, in this case, we don't, but generally speaking, you're going to want to change a couple of things. So, it is arguably quicker and easier to just go click fix and off it will go and it will change what we need to there.
And especially if it's speeding up your process, right? And what
exactly.
I love about the integration here, it shows me the arrows. It already shows me some solutions. And just with one click, it was so cool to see, hey, yes, it's being fixed. Of course, you still should think about the changes you're making there, but just seeing the huge enhancement in speed is truly something that I like.
Yeah, it's all about productivity and it's all about increasing that productivity. Tiny side note, actually, and I think last time I saw you in person, actually, at Build, we were talking about this. One of the great use cases I always have that I talk to customers about is translations, and I was doing some development into French, and I don't know anything in French other than cheese omelette, oddly. For some reason, I know that in French. I don't know anything else, but I know cheese omelette. And I was doing some translations anyway, and I had a language file that was in English, and I asked Copilot to change it for me and translate it into French. And kind of using that trust but verify model that we all talk about and everyone talks about, I asked the person we were working with to make sure that it was on point in terms of the style we were looking for, and they made a few changes, but it was mostly okay. But one of the things I love about that is there was nearly 300 language definitions in that file, and even if I was a fluent speaker of French, there is no way I could do it as quick as what Copilot did, even making a few changes. So, in terms of it enhancing my workflow as developer, it makes all of the difference. Even the little prompts it gives you when you're typing certain things as it's learning as you're going, that it knows you've done something previously, you might be doing that again, and if you are, you can just tab to auto complete those. Those things are really gold dust. So there's also an issue with this one. So firstly, let's try and explain what the problem is. So you can see it's using the file out of the workspace as context. Again, anyone that spent any time here with AI will understand that context is incredibly important, and the better context you can provide, the better value you are going to get from using AI. So for me, it always makes big improvement. So here we're being asked to make sure that we replace get field by ID and get application activities with meaningful and unique identifiers for each operation. So it's basically giving us a bit of a telling off, I guess, ultimately, because we've not been as descriptive as we should be, which is obviously really important, and one of the things that makes a big difference in API governance and discovery, I guess, as well, is we know that an API has already been created to do something that we want to do in our application, so we can just call that API rather than write a complete new one, which may surface different data, may do something slightly differently, in any number of scenarios. So it is really important to make sure that kind of stuff exists. So we can go through and we can make all of the changes. Obviously, this is pretty big example, but once that's done, what you can actually do is you can come back up to your API and you can then post a new version. You can you can register a new API if you would like to as well. And you can update the definitions and the versions as required. One of the other things that's really cool as well, when I just closed that and didn't mean to, is we can use the Azure. Oh, what's happened there? Press the wrong thing. That's what's happened there.
Too many co-pilots.
Too many co-pilots. I'm not sure we're allowed to say that. It's at Azure. So one of the other things I can also do is, based on my rule set file, I can ask it to provide me an open API spec that is compliant with that rule set. So I can say generate an open API spec for a planets API that is compliant with the rule set. So you can ask it any kind of natural language variant of that as well, and you will see what comes up. Here, just to point out a few points from over here. First one, the contact email. You can see it has put the contact email in there. It has used context that is already there to know who I am as well, which is amazing. The operation ID, again, operation ID exists, and it is in lower snake case. And there is also a summary and a description as well. Again, what's great from here is I can go save that file, and straight from here I can go register this manually. So I can pick up my instance, I can give my API a title. I could say it's REST, the version number. Let's be really naughty and just say it's version 1, and give it a life cycle. Give the definition a title. Say it's an open API file, and then select the file that we have just saved. So I'd go select that, and that would then go register itself within API Center, and it would be available for everyone else to use. And it's kind of finally, from me on this part, what I really like is that I've not left VS Code at all. I've not needed to go into the Azure portal at all. I've not needed to speak to Julia as an admin to say, what do I need to do? You know, what do I have to put a contact email in? How do you want your operation IDs formatting? Do I have to provide an operation ID? And do you need a summary and a description? I don't need to know that, because I can just download the latest rule set and I can generate those things based on the information that I already have and based on what I'm developing. So there we go. Nice and straightforward.
Yeah, let me highlight, just because I love how you explained this, Martyn, but just to highlight some of the things and really show what is actually happening under the hood while you're prompting or while you're showing the text prompt. Could you share your screen one more time, just so we are seeing VS Code? So basically, whenever you're using GitHub Copilot, first of all, you're calling at Azure, which essentially will not just call GitHub Copilot, it will call GitHub Copilot for Azure. So just by the add Azure text prompt, you're modifying the text prompt. You will already provide the text prompt or whatever description you will have in later, a little bit more Azure context. Azure context in that use case while building out the web API is important from an API governance angle. So of course you could do all of this, but you will, and the outcome will be also as well an open API spec file, but it might not be as compliant as what you want it to be like, right? And then the other thing I think interesting to see is you currently have the ruleset.yaml file as your current file. So it's not just taking into consideration the Azure context, but also the rule set, the organization rules that have been defined previously. So in this case, you're considering basically your text prompt and you want to enhance it with organizational context. And that's why the outcome that you can see in GitHub Copilot is based on your organizational needs. It's already compliant. It has the contact information. It has the operation ID. It's also in lower snake case. So it already matches whatever your organization has done. And yeah, you mentioned it correctly. You didn't have to talk to me. Of course, we are in this Teams chat and we were talking, but you didn't have to reach out to an API admin asking, hey, by the way, how can I make sure that this is compliant?
Yeah, in a big organization as well, where, quite frankly, some developers may not know who that person is.
Exactly.
That's not an unheard of scenario. So yeah, it's good. And another thing to mention as well that I think is quite important. So although as a .NET person, I've been talking about .NET here, in the spirit of everything else to do with development tools on Azure, language does not matter. So whether your API is written in TypeScript or JavaScript and it's a Node API, whether it is an API written in any of those languages that is supported on Azure today and can obviously run in the various different app services that are available. The same applies here because we are doing that analysis on an open API spec, which again is agnostic to the type of language that's used to write the API. So yeah, it doesn't really matter whether your organization has a mix of everything, settles on just Node APIs, settles on .NET, or like I say, has a mix of everything. Any and all is the order of the day.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that summarizes it very, very nicely. Before we are going to end, do you want to call out or give a big shout out to the sponsor, like the foundation, the cancer research, just one more time? So we are really making sure that, because it is a really good cause, and we just want to make sure that you guys are aware, and another extra shout out for these organizations here.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if you go over to festivetechcalendar.com, you can obviously donate to these folks. But yeah, the Beats and Cancer Charity, who provide wellbeing, group support services, and yeah, obviously bereavement services as well. Should you have to go through this horrible disease at some point in your life, or a loved one does, there are plenty of people there to be able to help you, and these guys are one of them. So yeah, if there's anything you can spare, then please do. It obviously makes a massive difference to charities, and you never know when you may need one of them yourself as well. So yeah, if there's anything you can spare, then please do. And yeah, I guess that's probably us.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Martyn.
So,
Thanks
yeah.
for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you as well, despite the massive time difference at the minute. At least you're not in Hawaii, put it that way. It could be worse.
That's true. That's true.
It
Yeah.
could be a lot worse.
Awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks everyone. Hope you found this useful. You can reach out to both of us on LinkedIn or socials and so on and so forth if you want to know a little bit more. But yeah, until next time, thanks everyone, and yeah, have a great Christmas if you do indeed celebrate Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Cheers everyone.